Washington, D.C. woke up this morning to what multiple senior aides are privately calling a full-scale political emergency. The White House, Capitol Hill, and the Pentagon are all scrambling after the sudden emergence of a leaked internal memorandum that has detonated across the entire federal power structure. It began as whispers behind closed doors, has now erupted into open concern, with members of Congress from both parties openly questioning whether the country is witnessing the most serious breakdown of civilian leadership in modern history. At the center of the storm is the American president, who, according to multiple fictional sources familiar with the scenario, has spent the last 48 hours in intense isolation, consulting closely with aides, demanding assurances, and ordering emergency meetings as the foundations of leadership begin to shake. This is not another routine controversy. This is not cable news noise. This is Washington entering a state of controlled fictional panic. The trigger was a classified memo, never intended to leave a secure briefing room, that somehow found its way into the hands of senior lawmakers across several oversight committees. The document, described by those who have reviewed it in this hypothetical scenario as chilling in tone and precise in detail, outlines a pattern of presidential influence in sensitive national security decisions that were ongoing at the time, not hypothetical planning, not abstract policy debate, active operations, real consequences, and direct pressure from the executive office. According to multiple fictional congressional staffers, the memo describes a series of communications in which the American president allegedly conditioned the timing of key authorizations on personal political considerations. The implication alone was enough to set off alarm bells. But when lawmakers began cross-referencing the memo with internal timelines and testimony from defense officials, concern escalated into something far more serious. Within hours of reviewing the document, senior members of Congress initiated a closed-door emergency session. No cameras, no press. The phone surrendered at the door. What followed, according to participants in this fictional scenario, was one of the most intense and consequential meetings many of them have ever experienced in public service. Republicans and Democrats sat side by side, reading the same passages, asking the same questions, and coming to the same unsettling conclusion. Whatever partisan instincts they brought into the room did not survive contact with the material in front of them. One senior lawmaker reportedly broke the silence by saying, "If this is accurate, we don't have a politics problem, we have a constitutional one." By the end of the meeting, something extraordinary had happened. A bipartisan coalition had formed, not around legislation or messaging, but around a single demand: accountability at the highest level. Circulating, lawyers weighed every word. Senior members argued not about whether action was necessary, but how severe that action should be. The resulting letter was unprecedented in both tone and scope. In this hypothetical story, it accused the American president of subordinating national interests to personal political advantage. It warned that such conduct, if left unchecked, would permanently damage the integrity of civilian control over the military. And most explosively, it concluded that the president no longer retained the confidence required to continue serving as commander-in-chief. When the letter was made public, Washington froze. Phones lit up across Capitol Hill. Party leaders were blindsided. Donors demanded explanations. News producers scrambled to confirm what many initially refused to believe. Members of the president's own party had signed their names to a document openly calling for accountability. The reaction inside the majority party was immediate and chaotic. Emergency meetings were convened. Strategy memos flew back and forth. Some lawmakers urged unity and silence, arguing that public fracture would only empower political opponents. Others warned that silence would be interpreted as complicity. The party was staring into a mirror it could no longer avoid. Inside the Pentagon, the mood was no less tense. Senior military leaders trained to remain apolitical suddenly found themselves at the center of a political firestorm they never sought. Sources describe an atmosphere of profound unease, with officials deeply concerned about the precedent being set and the perception it creates among service members and allies alike. And defense officials began speaking out, carefully choosing their words, but making their concerns unmistakably clear. One retired general stated that any perception of political leverage being applied to operational decision-making undermines trust throughout the chain of command. Another warned that even The appearance of such behavior can erode morale and confidence far beyond Washington. Legal scholars were equally alarmed. Constitutional experts appearing across news networks emphasized that while the American president wields enormous authority, that authority is not unlimited. Decisions must be made in service of national interest, not personal ambition. When that line is crossed, the entire system is placed under strain. What makes this moment so destabilizing is not just the memo itself, but the reaction it provoked. This is not a single whistleblower or a lone dissenter. This is a coordinated response from lawmakers who reviewed the same evidence and independently concluded that the situation demanded immediate action. The White House response only intensified the crisis. Instead of addressing the substance of the allegations, the American president launched a broad counteroffensive.
The memo was dismissed as false. Lawmakers were labeled disloyal.
The leak itself became the focus of executive outrage, with demands for investigations into who allowed the document to surface. But that strategy may have backfired. Analysts noted that attacking the messengers without refuting the message raised more questions than it answered. If the memo was baseless, why the urgency? Why the anger? Why the desperate calls for loyalty behind closed doors? As the days unfolded, consequences began cascading outward. Polling indicated a sharp decline in confidence among independent voters. Military families voiced concern. Allies abroad reportedly sought private reassurances about the stability of American leadership. What had begun as an internal document was now reshaping the global perception of governance. Within the majority party, fear turned into calculation. Lawmakers facing re-election began asking whether defending the president would now carry greater risk than breaking with him. A bipartisan letter had changed the math. It provided political cover for dissent and made loyalty a liability rather than a shield. Opposition lawmakers, for their part, moved cautiously. Party leadership emphasized process and restraint, aware that overreach could backfire. But behind the scenes, preparations accelerated. Committees expanded inquiries. Staff reviewed contingency scenarios. The machinery of accountability began grinding forward. This moment may ultimately be remembered not for a single memo, but for what it revealed beneath the surface. A system pushed to its limits, a presidency tested by its own actions, a Congress forced to choose between loyalty and responsibility. Presidents weathered by rarely one that so directly challenges the principle that power exists to serve the country, not the individual at the top. As more lawmakers review the memo, as more voices break their silence, and as pressure continues to mount, one thing is certain: Washington is no longer operating under normal conditions. The center is straining. Alliances are shifting, and the outcome remains deeply uncertain. This is not just political drama. This is a stress test of the system itself. Washington's instability is now accelerating, not stabilizing. What initially appeared to be a contained congressional concern is evolving into something far more volatile, a multi-front institutional crisis involving the executive branch, the legislature, the military establishment, and political parties themselves. Behind closed doors, senior administration officials are reportedly split into two camps. One faction is urging de-escalation, warning that continued confrontation with Congress and the military will only deepen the damage. Another faction, described by insiders as fiercely loyal and increasingly isolated, is pushing the American president to double down, to frame the entire crisis as an attempted plot by entrenched elites, and to rally the base through confrontation rather than compromise. This internal division has paralyzed decision-making inside the White House. Routine briefings are being postponed. Foreign leaders experience delays in scheduled calls. Senior staffers describe an atmosphere of suspicion where aides are questioned about leaks, loyalty, and even private communications. The presidency at this moment is operating in siege mode. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, pressure intensifies hour by hour. Additional lawmakers request access to the leaked memo, including members who previously avoided confrontation. Fear, not ideology now, drives action. fear of being on the wrong side of history if the allegations prove accurate. Several influential committee chairs quietly discuss next steps. While no formal impeachment proceedings have been announced, staff prepare outlines, timelines, and jurisdictional arguments. This is procedural groundwork, signaling that Congress is bracing for escalation. Political strategists describe this as a breaking point election cycle. Candidates in swing districts scramble to distance themselves without alienating core voters. Some release carefully worded statements emphasizing respect for the military and constitutional norms while avoiding direct mention of the president. Others remain silent, hoping the storm passes before reaching their districts. But silence becomes harder to maintain. Conservative media, once unified in defense, begins to fracture. Prominent commentators start acknowledging the severity of the allegations, framing them as questions of institutional integrity rather than partisan attacks. Inside the military community, the impact is subtle but profound. Active duty leaders remain publicly neutral, but retired officers and analysts voice concern about long-term consequences. They warn that when political loyalty is perceived as a factor in operational decisions, trust within the ranks erodes. Orders are followed, but confidence suffers, and in military terms, is not optional. Internationally, allies monitor the situation closely. Diplomats describe a surge of behind-the-scenes inquiries from partner nations seeking clarity on decision-making stability. Adversaries, meanwhile, are assessing whether internal turmoil creates strategic openings. Even the perception of distraction can alter global calculations. The president's response only adds fuel to the fire. In a series of increasingly combative statements, the American president frames the crisis as an existential threat, not just to the office, but to the political movement represented. Iberia's supporters are urged to see the controversy not as governance, but as an attack on identity and influence. That framing energizes the base, but narrows options. By casting the conflict in absolute terms, compromise becomes betrayal and retreat becomes weakness. Every move carries amplified risk. Experts warn that the situation approaches a critical threshold, not due to a single action, but accumulation. Each refusal to engage substantively, each attack on oversight, each effort to delegitimize institutional checks adds weight to the argument that normal corrective mechanisms are being. This moment is uniquely dangerous. No tanks in the streets. No dramatic resignations yet. Just a slow, grinding confrontation between branches of government, each testing the limits of the other. Some lawmakers openly ask whether the country is prepared for consequences if the American president refuses to step aside, even under overwhelming bipartisan condemnation. Others warn that forcing the issue too aggressively could deepen polarization and destabilize the system. There are no easy exits. The next phase will likely be decisive. Either the crisis diffuses through negotiation and internal correction, or it escalates into a defining constitutional confrontation, reshaping American politics for a generation. One senior lawmaker, speaking privately, sums it up. This isn't about winning the next news cycle. This is about whether the rules still matter when power is tested. For now, the nation remains suspended in uncertainty. Institutions are strained, loyalties are tested. And the outcome depends on decisions made in rooms the public will never see. This is no longer just a scandal. It is a what-if reckoning in progress.